Welcome to Treatment Room Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the world of real athletes, real injuries, and the experts who keep them performing at their best. In this episode, host Dani Marks sits down with Dr. Mitch Hauschildt, Prevention, Rehabilitation, and Physical Performance Coordinator at Missouri State University. Mitch works on the front line of Division I sports, helping athletes stay powerful, prevent injury, and come back stronger than ever. It's smart, raw, and packed with insights you can use right away. Let's step into the treatment room.
Good morning, Mitch Hauschildt.
Good morning.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did very good.
Good.
Yeah, very good. I love it.
Yeah.
Not many people are right. So Hauschildt is correct.
I've been practicing, I won't lie. It's nice.
Our win for the day. I love it.
Yeah, it's nice to speak to someone, sitting in the evaluation room, in the treatment room. The name of the podcast is Treatment Room Secrets, with the goal of, trying to, bring out on, some nuggets, some, maybe some so-called secrets from the treatment room, some things that are, behind the scenes, behind the closed doors that can just be useful and practical to practitioners, to people that are just interested in these topics, to people that are athletes who are just active, who have faced injuries, who are facing injuries, etc., etc. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm excited as well. I always love talking shop and exploring some different ideas. So definitely looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So just if you don't mind, just to give a bit of a background into your role today, and I will ask you also about really your journey in arriving to where you are now. But you are at Missouri State University, is that correct?
Yes.
And you oversee the rehab and prehab for really all sports, and it's a Division I school, it's a top school, right? Top football team, etc., etc.
Yeah, so I'm at Missouri State University. So my official title is I'm the Prevention, Rehab, and Physical Performance Coordinator. So super long title. Like, what does that mean, right? So I am in charge of all of our injury prevention strategies for all of our athletes. So that has changed a lot over the years. We used to do a lot of, functional movement screens, a lot of different hopping and single leg movements, things like that, and just collecting data that we can share with our strength coaches, our sport coaches, our other athletic trainers, and try to integrate interventions that we can use to try to remain healthy. And now, as technology's evolved, we're using a lot of force plate data and different things along those lines. We're using a lot of tracking data with our different teams as far as load and GPS and those types of things. So now it's really more a lot about analytics and sitting down with our coaches. But the first priority there is how do we remain healthy? And then the flip side of my job is I'm the rehab coordinator. So I'm an athletic trainer by training, but I really practice more like a traditional physical therapist does, in that I just focus on the rehab side of the athletic training profession. I do a little bit of sideline coverage from time to time, but the vast majority of my job is 8:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, in the training room doing advanced rehabs. I handle most of our post-surgical athletes. I handle a lot of the more difficult biomechanical cases. If my teams are on the road and they need to leave some guys back, I'll work with them, kind of a thing. Do a lot of dry needling. I can make custom orthotics in-house, like all of those kinds of things I can do, and that's really my role here at the university. Above and beyond that, really kind of my unofficial roles are just trying to make sure that our staff is always up to speed on kind of what the latest and greatest is that's out there technology-wise, and rehab type philosophies and things that we can always be integrating. Missouri State, we are what we consider a mid-major Division I university. For many years, we've competed in the Missouri Valley Conference. We're actually moving to Conference USA starting in the fall of 2025. So that's a move up for us. So our football will move from FCS level to FBS level. So some exciting times around campus of making some moves. And we've got right now about 550 student athletes spread across 21 sports. As we're moving around, as as NCAA sports is moving, we're probably going to bump that up about 70 athletes going into the fall. So definitely not a shortage of people to take care of over here. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's just one of those things, right? There's every season, there's just going to be injuries. Have you,
Yes.
right? It just doesn't exist, and even anyone who follows, professional sports, just knows. Unfortunately, you just have to account for injuries. Why? Why is that the case?
Well, I mean, part of it is just the nature of sports, right? And so, you look at a sport like football or even soccer or basketball. I mean, anytime you have contact collision type sports, there's going to be injuries, right? There's going to be somebody slide tackles somebody, their foot gets caught in the turf and they tear an ACL or they, fracture an ankle, something like that. Football, a lineman's always going to get rolled up on. So, I mean, there's some of those things that are impossible to really prevent. And I say that as a guy who has always been almost kind of arrogant with how I thought I could prevent all injuries, if I'm being honest. Like I just feel like ACL injuries should be like a 0 at our athletic department. But I know, logically that's not going to happen. But I will say, like, non-contact ACLs, I think when things are done right, we can prevent 95% of those. I really do believe that. The challenge we have, I'll be honest, with college athletics right now is over the last few years, and Dani, I don't know how much you follow NCAA sports, but with the transfer portal, well, now it used to be, kids would come to school and they would stay here 4 or 5 years. And now, I mean, we've got kids that go to 5 different schools in 5 different years. And unfortunately, what no one wants to tell you, everybody's saying, well, it's the best interest of the kids. They get to go seek their best path and all this. It's actually really crushing them in a lot of ways, and they don't even know it. But there's no long-term athletic development that's taking place in college athletics right now, which is a really big shame. When I say we should be able to prevent all these non-contact ACLs, that's because we should be able to have 2, 3, 4 years worth of consistent training with these kids where we're really dialed in on taking you from an 18-year-old kid to a 22-year-old mature man or woman that competes at a high level. And we have very specific progressions on how to get there. Well, now we've moved into just don't break the kids. We just make sure they can get on the field because we have such short off seasons now, and we don't know if a kid's going to play next year. So, another factor here is we used to have coaches that wanted to redshirt kids and develop them, say, you know what, we're going to invest in these kids for the first 2 years because we know the last 2 or 3 years they're going to be really, really good. Well, now coaches are like, I don't know if they're going to be here next year, so I might as well play them. I might as well burn them. So we have kids burn a year and not worry about it, because now we have kids that are playing that really probably shouldn't be out there, that in years past we would have never rolled out there. But we'll take the 15 or 20 reps because we don't know what we're going to have next year. So it's kind of really transitioned. I 5-10 years ago, I was really proud of the injury prevention strategies that we had. Now, I do find a lot more of my job is sort of reactive rehab, because we just aren't able to do nearly the development up front to prevent a lot of the injuries. And I think that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for our kids. It's unfortunate for teams and coaches. But it is sort of the status of NCAA sports today.
Yeah, and it's and maybe for some individual players, in very unique cases, it's having some power, and some leverage is beneficial, maybe for the potential superstars. But,
Sure.
out of the 600 student athletes you have at Missouri State, and other schools, not many of them are in that, top bracket of individuals who have that luxury, really. But yeah.
Sorry. The unfortunate part of that, just to emphasize what you're saying, is, you look at the transfer portal across the country, more than 70% of kids that go into the transfer portal actually end up in a worse financial position after they go into the portal than before. But all they're seeing is the handful of high-level players that are going into the portal, and they're going up a level, or they're getting big NIL money. The vast majority of kids are actually getting hurt by the portal, but nobody wants to talk about that, which is, I don't want to get on a soapbox about the things I disagree with college sports these days.
Yeah, I know.
Just to be honest, I mean, that's just where we're at.
And yeah, it's where we're at, and it's also just so far into this, you know, differences, you know, progression. I was going to use the word progression. I don't know if it's progress, but, you know, change. We're so far into this change that's been implemented that, you know, so many have been fighting for so long, where it's hard to see them, you know, taking these steps back, right, in the near future.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's not going to happen.
I mean,
but
they're trying to get under control with this big house settlement, and this judge can't make
Yeah.
up her mind what we're going to do. But I don't know what the path forward is, to be honest.
So off air, I mentioned that I'm politically on the soccer side of sports. So I don't want to get into the politics of NCAA and college sports and stuff. But injuries, ACL. You know, anytime you say ACL, and the statement that you made, I think is a pretty big one. And I'm not. I hope that you're right. You know, I hope that you can prevent 95% of non-contact ACL injuries. It always made sense to me that you can, because it's hard to swallow that it's just a fluke, and that there's, it's just hard to swallow, because it's like, and it's like, it's in soccer, and I can only presume in other sports, it's like the worst injury you can experience, because it takes a year of your career away, and your career is so short anyway. It's just, it'll finish you. Most people, it'll just finish you. I faced it was actually my first training session my freshman year at Penn State University. I tore my ACL non-contact, just by changing direction, like I did a million times without even thinking about it. Yeah. And that happened to me, and I've overanalyzed, the weeks leading up to it, and the months leading up to it, and the minutes and the hours leading up to it. And it's just it. And what I do know for a fact, it's hard to kind of quantify what spiritual, emotional, or, a state I was in, or my fatigue levels. Those things are difficult to think about. But what I do know is that I wasn't in my most robust state. Like, I wasn't at my fittest. I wasn't at my strongest. I had different niggling, smaller injuries in different areas of my body that bothered me, that I just kept ignoring, and just kept, playing with and overcompensating. Pain on my other knee, not the one that I tore the ACL at, or pain on the hip flexor of the same leg I tore the ACL, or plantar fasciitis on the other. So I can only presume that when I was changing direction at that instance, that maybe I've done that same movement, still overcompensating, leading up to that moment for the weeks before, months before. But maybe it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, of another change of direction with overcompensating that, cracked me at that moment. But so what are things that, one, red flags, or one maybe should think about, or foundations that should be considered to put in place to even think, and even, because even if the 95% number is pretty high, but even if we can prevent 50% or 40% of these injuries, would be amazing.
Well, and I agree. And I mean, listen to your story of being at Penn State and playing soccer. I can sympathize, right? Like, I mean, I played college football many years ago, but I never tore my ACL, but I had 5 knee surgeries in 5 years. And I look back, I'm like, gosh, I spent a lot of time just trying to recover from knee scopes. And like, it is challenging, right? And it's so tough mentally to overcome those things. My 13-year-old son tore his ACL last September playing soccer. He's my soccer nut. And his was a contact injury, but still, he's been out all year trying to rehab and recover from it. So it is unfortunate. What I will say, and I think, maybe there was a little bit of luck there, but so when my first 6 years, I'm in my 18th year at Missouri State, so I'm kind of getting up there. Been here a long time, but my first 6 years I was here. I was in the role I'm at now, but I was also the strength coach for women's basketball and volleyball, and I will say my 6 years with women's basketball, we had one ACL, and it was a contact. Girl went up for a layup and got undercut. And that doesn't mean that I know all, but what I do what I take from that, and I'll take 6 years without an ACL on a women's basketball team. I'll take that any day. My coaches loved it. But as a strength coach, I was able to control the injury prevention, the day-to-day training, a lot of the volume that we were doing, making sure that we're fit. And so I think there is a recipe there that we can work on. The challenge is like, I think where we've ended up with a lot of people trying to prevent ACLs is they're always looking for like that one magic bullet, right? Like, what is the one thing that we should be doing? And so that's where people have come up with like, well, if we just do this one extra warm-up, we'll be good. Or if we add these 2 extra exercises. The problem is it's just not that simple, and it is multifactorial. So it's like you're just describing, right? You're like, well, I ignored some plantar fasciitis, some hip flexor pain. My other knee was a little bit sore. I was tired. Maybe I had this going on emotionally in my life. Like, all of those things matter, right? And all of those things, and we are a sum of all of our experiences as we sit in front of each other right now, right? And so all of those factors played a role. So that's where it becomes a challenge of, when I go out and lecture, like, how do we prevent ACLs? Well, we got about, I don't know how many. I'd have to count them. Like, how many different things we need to think about. We need to think about hip control and your ability to control hip rotation and the valgus moment at our knee. We need to look at foot control, and do we have the ability to create sort of that tripod in our foot? We need to look at timing and sequencing of our hamstrings versus our quads. We need to look at our ability to decelerate under high stress and high loads efficiently. We need to look at core control. A lot of ACLs, people don't realize a lot of non-contact ACLs come back to poor core control. So as I'm sprinting, I decelerate, plant to try to cut. If we have what they call sway, where my upper body continues to go forward as I plant and cut, that's putting extra force on that knee. And that's really a product of the fact that if I'm not stable in my core, I can't decelerate with my lower body. And so we look at that. We look at, just how you're built, right? Do you happen to have like an anatomical leg length discrepancy? One leg's a little bit longer than the other that maybe we should consider addressing.
Which I do, by the way, which is another,
right. So nutrition, recovery, fitness, right? And what most of the research is showing now, we used to, and I definitely believe this, we saw a lot more injuries. It just seemed that way, sort of coincidentally, that we would see more injuries at the end of a game, right? And maybe, but actually the research doesn't support that so much. The research supports that you have far more injuries when you ramp up, right? So you've got the soccer team that comes in. Those guys maybe haven't trained very hard all summer, and all of a sudden they come in and they're training 4 or 5 hours a day between 2 or 3 different workouts with their fitness stuff, on the field work or whatever. That ramp up in the first couple of weeks is when, the injury rates go through the roof. So then it becomes down to, how do we prepare our athletes better physically, just fitness level wise? So when they come in, practice is easy compared to what we've done preseason. Like, so there's all these different factors that play into it. And that's where I think it becomes difficult. There's no one real magic pill that we can swallow and say, here it is, we prevent the ACLs. But when we look at sort of the biomechanics, we look at stability, strength. Even just strength, I'm a firm believer, as cool as all the technology we have, all the different things, at the end of the day, there's no replacement for getting under a bar and being strong, right? And being able to squat and lunge. And strength is the basic fundamentals of all athletic movement. If we're not strong, we'll never be stable or fast or efficient. And so we just have to be able to lift heavy things and pick up heavy things and put them back down. So you start putting all these factors together. That's where we see the sort of the secret sauce and the magic happens. And I think that's where, to be honest, the good clinicians, the good strength coaches really separate themselves from sort of the average ones, the ones that are willing to look at all the factors, think outside the box. I love what Charlie Weingroff says, is like training equals rehab, right? And so I think that is one disconnect. And one thing that I've been passionate about for many years is strength conditioning and rehab really shouldn't be separated. They're all on the same continuum. It's just a matter of where we're putting people on that continuum. And so the ability to know both sides of that equation of rehab versus strength conditioning, and then just place somebody on the right spot and progress them the way they should be progressed, that's where we're really able to help people out.
Yeah, and so it obviously there are many facets, and it does sound complicated. But are those, like, is that part of your role, is to try and break that down and to do all the relevant testing with as many athletes as possible, and to at least try with all the data involved to spot these red flags that might pop
Yeah,
up?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we're at a school where we've got some resources, but not a ton of resources. You go to like the Power Four schools, they have full sports scientists. Their full-time job is just analyze data. And they're looking at force plates, they're looking at GPS data, they're looking at all the catapult stuff, like heart rate stuff, accelerometry. They're looking at every day. That's all they do. We aren't in that position. We don't have those kinds of budgets. So my role becomes, how do I pluck out the most important information out of our data that we have, and then trickle that down to our strength coaches and our sport coaches, boil it down. What's our biggest nuggets here that we need to know? We're better than, Division II or Division III schools that don't have any of those resources, and they're just sort of old school by the eye. And I think that can be effective as well. But yeah, part of my role, and we sit down as a staff. One of the best things we did a few years ago is we started scheduling regular meetings, usually kind of every other week. We sit down, myself, our athletic trainer for each sport, our head coach for that sport, maybe a few of their assistants, our strength coach for that sport. And we just go player by player, and we look at who's doing well, who's not doing well, who's losing weight, who's gaining weight, who needs to see our dietitian, who's got this little bit of pain or soreness, who's got this major injury. And we just check in on everybody, look at what the schedules that's coming up, look at how we adjust practice schedules. And I'll be honest, we have some head coaches that don't love those meetings. They don't like to be told that they should adjust this or that. But I will tell you, our coaches here that have been the most progressive and the most willing to listen to those things are the ones that are constantly winning championships. And, our men's soccer team, I know you're a soccer guy, right? Missouri State, we typically over the last 5 to 10 years are ranked in the top 15 to 20 in the country. And our head coach is very progressive. When I say, hey, we need to back down our guys, he's like, okay, let's do that. How can we get more out of these guys? He's very driven by data, by the GPS numbers, very driven by our force plate data. And I think when, in today's world, when our coaches are willing to collaborate with us on that, everybody wins. Our athletes win, our players win, our teams win. So that's really kind of our goal, what we've tried to adapt to at our institution.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I was going to ask you about, like, coaches, how they receive this information, how open they are to communicating about this information, because especially from, again, my side of politics in soccer, there's there's camps that are maybe more purists, soccer purists that don't want the data scientists involved at all. Get the GPS data away from me. It's irrelevant because I'm a coach. I've been coaching for decades. My eyes can read the situations. But others, maybe more realists, are saying, like, okay, we're, we spend so much time recruiting this player. Maybe in professional levels, we spend so much money recruiting this player. Let's see how we can, mitigate the risk of injury and how we can get the most out of this player. Because, right, even the best players in the world are just as vulnerable to tearing their hamstring or their ACL as anyone else.
Right.
So it's
I think in today's high level athletics, the guys right now that are willing to be data driven tend to be more successful. That's not across the board, right? And there's times where I'll say too, like, I don't need a force plate to tell me that someone doesn't load well. Like, I can see that with my eyes. But what it does do is it makes it more efficient to collect that information. And to boil it down to specific actionable information and actionable data. I think that's the big thing right there, is like, what am I willing to take action on? And we used to collect all this data, and our coaches would be like, I don't know what to do with it, or I don't want to do anything with it. And now sort of this younger generations of coaches that are coming through are seeing it, and they're seeing how important it is. Our women's basketball coach our staff is very data driven, and our strength coach can say, here's our catapult data, here's what our load is for this week. If we continue on this path, we're either going to have a good outcome or a bad outcome based on, but these are my recommendations. And our coaches are like, okay, so we need to pull back. And, guess what? 2 of the last 3 years, we've won a conference championship using that approach. And so, there's no replacement for experience, but the data is hard to ignore.
And also I was going to add, so it's not like so dichotomous whether you're with data or against data, but it's more how you communicate and like negotiate a bit with the data, because you can because you can be fed irrelevant data.
No question.
So you almost need, I think, and maybe coaches that have never had experience with data, or even players that have never had experience, with reading numbers, need that translator, mediator to communicate, even someone like you or someone on your team that can actually communicate these things, why this piece of data is important to acknowledge objectively or not.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point, and you're right. It is hard because it's easy to get just inundated with numbers, right, and get paralyzed by numbers. And I'm guilty of that, right? Like I do at times probably look too much at the numbers. But I'll say this, that the thing my coaches hear from me all the time is, as long as there's context to the information, then I'm good with it. So what I mean by that is, like, our athletes, depending on the sport, once or twice a week will jump on a force plate. Now, the force plates are so sensitive today that if one of our athletes had a fight with their significant other and didn't sleep well last night, it's going to show up on their force plate data the next day. And I can dial in and see those things. Now, the question becomes, like, what do I do with that information? So if I'm looking at a jump once a week on a force plate data, and they just happen to have a big test the day before, they were stressed out about it, and it shows up, like, what do I do with that information? How do I navigate that? So that's where it's so important for us to sit down as a staff and figure this out. So what I always tell our coaches is, like, hey, why didn't Dani jump well today, right? And they'll be like, oh, well, they shared with me they had this going on. Or, you know what, he tweaked his ankle the day before in practice. Okay, good. I'm fine with that. It's the stuff that we're like, hey, wait a second, we don't know why that data doesn't look good. That's the stuff that makes me nervous. And so that's where we have to go, wait a second, we need to check in. What's going on? Do we need to work on recovery? Do we need to address something else? And that's where I can go to our strength coaches as well and say, hey, I think we need to adjust this and tweak your workout this way. And we've had some strength coaches in the past here. I'm lucky right now where I've really, we have butted heads, and they want to do it their way. They're old school. We're going to be Olympic lifting. We're going to do this and this and this. And that's the way I train. We've got guys right now on our staff, and we've been pretty selective with hiring them this way. But we've got guys on our strength staff right now that are willing and open to constantly adapt and have those conversations. And I think that's a big key, just that communication piece. Our head coaches, our strength coaches, our sports medicine staff, when we're all working in unison, even bringing our physicians and our surgeons. I mean, I talk with our surgeons all the time about different things, and we're constantly trying to figure out the best way to move forward. When those communication pieces are constantly happening, that's when everybody succeeds. And so I just can't say that enough. And I tell people all the time, because I do a lot of consulting. I travel and teach a lot, work with a bunch of different companies. And I realize that, a lot of clinicians that may be watching this, right, aren't in a university setting where they have access to strength coaches and chiropractors and dietitians and all these things around them. I tell them, even if you're in a clinic, you need to find those people around you. You need to have referral sources. So when you see those things happening, you see somebody breaking down, you can at least send somebody out and say, you know what, I don't specialize in this, but I'm a little bit nervous about this. I'd like to send you over to this registered dietitian just to check in and make sure you're fueling your body appropriately for what your goals are, whether your goals are, to just be able to play with your kids or to be a high level athlete. It doesn't matter. Everybody has goals. How do we achieve those? So I'm always telling people, you need to surround yourself with a team. Sometimes we have to be creative how we create that team, but that team approach to healthcare is really the main goal and the best way to do things.
And that makes you a better clinician, a better practitioner, is just having that team around you, even if it's not you, administering the specific treatment, but it's you who recognize that, this person might need help. So absolutely, and I think that's a great point. I was going to ask you about specifically post-operation rehab. There's a lot of different surgeries that are occurring regularly, and right, it's like even something like a meniscus surgery is like these days so quick and easy, and players sometimes are back within 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes you see,
Correct.
which is amazing. ACL, sometimes I've been, ever since I tore my ACL, I've been an ACL nuts, in terms of just like so intriguing to see how people handle the rehab and what different things people are doing. And I always find it intriguing how some players are back at 6 months to full speed, some 10 months, some never. So it's just super interesting. So so from your perspective, kind of I wanted to ask you, maybe I don't know if you want to start from the negative side, but I was going to ask you, like, when do things go wrong on the rehab side, assuming this the surgeon does a good job and everything goes well with the surgery? When does it, on the rehab side, things go wrong?
It's a interesting question. And I will say, my younger years, when I was naive and arrogant, more than I am now, like I used to think the surgeon didn't really matter, right? Like I could rehab anybody's ACL. And then I had a few really bad ACLs from some surgeon. I was like, okay, this has to be a team approach. So it really does. Like you have to have a fantastic surgeon, but any good surgeon worth their salt would say you have to have fantastic rehab on the back end. I think where things go wrong, typically what I see is assuming the surgery's done well. On the rehab side, I think people miss progressions. I think that's where things get a little bit off the rails. And what I mean by that is we should have like really specific progressions to get from A to Z in a systematic manner. And I think people tend to see stuff, or they tend to be driven by time frames versus a systematic approach. So typically, like let's use an ACL, right? So if we're doing a 6-month return, which I have some thoughts on that as well that we can revisit if you want to. But let's say we do a 6-month return to play. That's the goal, right? Is to return somebody to 6 months. Then that means we probably need to be doing some linear straight ahead running at 3 months. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people will go, well, 12 weeks, here we are. It's time to run. Let's go run. And they're using the timeline versus have they been properly prepared to do that? Have they done all the strength work? Have they done the deceleration work? Have they been doing some running mechanics? Have they been doing all these different things to prepare them to run prior to just putting them out there? And I think a lot of people miss that. And so you'll have some people that are really fast out of the gate and feel great and they're ahead of the curve. And then we sort of go to sleep on it. And then you have other people that just are slow coming out of the gate. And then it's like, well, I don't know if you're ready or not, but I'm going to throw you out there because 12 weeks, it says we're supposed to do that. And so you got that. And then the other piece, I see a lot of young clinicians that they get in the trap of, especially in today's world with social media, right? Like it's so easy to see cool exercises on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And you're like, man, I want my patients doing that. Okay, that's awesome, right? There's lots to be learned out there. There's tons of great information that we can gather from all that. But you don't get to do the really fun, cool, sexy stuff unless we've done all the foundational work up front. And so I see people missing parts of those progressions. And so they want to jump right to the cool stuff and they forget about the steps ahead of that. And what that does then is it puts their patients in positions where they're not going to be successful because they're not going to be able to master those advanced things without the foundational work. And then they get frustrated. And then we get frustrated too, because we're having to work twice as hard to teach them something. Where if we do in small little progressions, then we're asking our patients, like, just take this little bite today, another little bite tomorrow, another little bite, versus trying to just swallow some big, huge pill all at once. We're better off to take those incremental steps. And so I think those are two things that come to mind, is being driven by more the systematic approach of progressions and doing them in small incremental steps.
So looking at something like ACL rehab and from the get-go, setting it up as a goal to return to full play at 6 months. But so are you setting yourself up for failure in a way, because then already you're determined by, number of months or number of weeks versus the actual, level of capability that you'll be witnessing on a daily basis in the training room?
I mean, I don't think you're setting up for failure, but I think what it means is, if I say a 6-month return, then that means I have to have a pretty systematic approach that if I'm going to meet that benchmark, then I should be doing a certain progression at week 3 or month 4. And if my patients aren't ready for that, then I just know that I've got to push them back a little bit. I will say the 6-month return is interesting. When I was in college in the mid late 90s, there was a push to get people back at like 3 or 4 months. And then everybody sort of settled in on the 6 months. The reality is the research, actually, we shouldn't return anybody for 12 months. And there are certain things, don't get me wrong, there are certain things that, it really does take about a year for that graft to fully vascularize. Bone healing only takes place at a certain rate. So it depends on the graft you have, right? Like the bone plug is going to take 6 weeks to heal in. There's nothing I can really do to accelerate that. But the other things we can play around with. But even there was a study that came out recently that said that athletes that return before 9 months are, I think, 7 times more likely to get re-injured than those who were returned after a 9-month mark. And so this idea that we should be returning people ACLs 4 to 6 months out really isn't supported in the literature. Now, I don't see people going back on that. I think people are still going to be willing to take their chance. But if we're going to do that 6-month return, we have to set it up so we're very systematic and people are meeting their goals all along the way. If we miss a goal, then we need to push it back a week or 2. And that's okay. But we have to lay it out. So if you were to look at my ACL I don't like the word protocol, but sort of my guidelines, I mean, it's literally like 30 some pages long that I wrote up for my students years ago of how we systematically work through it, because that's kind of the detail you need if you're going to return somebody to a Division I level at that 6-month mark and expect them to compete at a high level. There's also a difference in return to play versus actually returning to your play status, right? So I'm sure you can relate to that, right? Like you probably came back from your ACL, you probably didn't feel normal for a year at least, right?
Yeah.
Where it just felt regular. Like there's a difference between throwing somebody out there and say, well, they got back to play, and actually be able to perform at a high level. So
honestly, being away for, just to throw it in, but being away for so many months from playing or competing at the level you were used to, once you return to play, it's like you don't even remember how you were before. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're just creating a new version of you, period.
Right.
Yeah, just based on memory of what maybe you were or thought you were doing. But
I'm trying to explain my son right now, and he's almost 14, right? So it's a different world, right? He doesn't have the emotional maturity that you would have as a college athlete. But I mean, helping him to understand, like he's getting ready to try out for next year's club team. And I'm like, son, I think you need to understand there's 3 teams at his club in his age group. Last year, he was like the middle team. Their top team is like a national level team, super good. He was on their middle team, which is like regional, and then they have more of a local team. I'm like, son, I think you need to be prepared that you're going to be on the local team for next year. He's like, well, I don't want to take that, have to step back. I'm like, but you haven't played soccer for 9 months. Like, forget about the ACL. If you just hadn't played soccer for 9 months, you wouldn't have been able to play at a high level and expect to just walk back in. So setting those expectations, I think, is also a piece of the equation.
What happens? Are you like just out of interest? Are you involved in your son's post-op rehab? That's one. And two, like what happens? At ACL reconstruction at that age. Do we know? Like what happens, development-wise, biomechanically after that?
Like now, like you want me to peel back the curtains? Like here, all right. So this is.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. And in honesty, I'm going to be honest. When I find, so my son, just to tell the quick story, when he came home from practice and has hurt his knee, and my son's a little bit dramatic, and I was like, dude, you're fine, whatever. And I looked at it, I'm like, there's quite a bit of swelling in there, but I'm like, you're going to be all right. Let's work through it. Well, I was encouraging him, just get some range of motion back and get moving on it. And it was a couple days later, he went out to just kind of kick a ball around with a couple of his buddies, and he came off and he's like, Dad, like I don't remember what word he used, but basically he told me he shifted. I was like, oh crap. He may have got, so then we finally got an MRI. And when he tore it, when we found out he tore it, like I literally cried. I'm going to be honest. Like I was like, and I did it for a couple of reasons. Number one is I knew what the recovery process was going to be like. I knew how challenging it was going to be for a young guy like him, but I also knew there weren't great surgical options. And so it's like all of that together, like, and our surgeon who did surgery is a dear friend of mine. I've known him for 20 plus years. And he was like, right with me. He's like, I don't have great options for you. But the first question is, am I involved in his rehab? I am, but I actually farmed a lot of it out. And I tell you, I'll do that. The reason I did that is, my son and I, while in a lot of ways have a great relationship, in a lot of ways we also butt heads. And we made a conscious decision between the two of us that it might not be the best option for he and I to do rehab together every day, because I would be coaching him. And where is that dad coach like relationship, right? And so I actually had some former students of mine that I know and trust that work at a clinic here in town. I had them do the first like 5-6 months worth of his rehab. And now I'm helping him finish it out and getting back into playing soccer. So we just did that more for our relationship than anything else. Even though I will say it's hard, because I'm kind of a control freak and I wanted that control over the situation, but I trusted the people that were doing it. So I was okay with it.
Yeah.
Now the surgical options for young people is not great, right? So I'm a believer that, and I don't know what kind of graph you had with yours, but I'm old school patella
hamstring.
tendon.
I was hamstring.
So it's weird in the Midwest, like patella tendon is still the gold standard. You get out to the coast and there's a lot of variables there. There's a lot of variation with what surgeons want to do. I'm still a believer that the patellar tendon, if I had to have mine repaired, that's what I would do. I think that the bone plug on each end gives us a really good, solid, stable endpoint. And you can put a screw in it. It's great. The hamstrings are a fine option. What I personally have noticed long-term with some hamstrings is when I do a Lockman's or an anterior drawer on them to test them, they just feel a little squishy. They don't feel like, boom, there's the end of that ACL. But again, there's a lot of variance in surgeons with that also. Recently,
I was
go ahead.
Say, me personally I think the preference was patella, but I've experienced like different patella tendinitis before that. So they recommended to avoid, to find another solution. But we went to the hamstring, and my knee, God bless, was, until today, always fine since. But
good.
My hamstring, I always faced issues. I always faced issues with the hamstring after, yeah.
Right. So you got that variable. In recent years, we've seen a lot of surgeons go to the quad tendon and taking part of the quad tendon above the patella. That's ultimately what we did with my son. And the reason we did that was he, at a kid that age, you have to really look at growth plates. And if their growth plates aren't closed and you try to do like a patellar tendon, you'll actually end up with that limb being shorter, because once you cut into some of those growth plates to take that bone plug, then you're going to end up with a shortened leg. We don't want that. His were closed enough that we could do sort of a traditional ACL. Now, there is a technique out there called the epiphyseal sparing technique, where they actually put the graft in at a different angle to avoid the growth plate. The problem with that is it's got a failure rate of about 30%. And I've worked on kids that have had that and they have failed. And I didn't want that for my son. So we were lucky.
When you say fail, does that mean like the new ACL gives out?
Correct. They'll re-tear it. So I had a kid, one of my other son's basketball teammates a few years ago, he tore his at age 12, and they did his an epiphyseal sparing technique, and he tore it almost a year to the day later. He retore, and now he had to have it redone again because they just tried to avoid those growth plates. And then the angle of the graft is not the same as our original anatomy, so they don't have the same rotational stability. So we were lucky his growth plates were closed enough that we could at least put it in the anatomical position, but we didn't want to take the patellar tendon with the bone plugs. So we used a quad tendon instead. It's really beefy and been rock solid. But the other thing we did with him, and getting kind of the nuances here, is we did an LET with him, which is a lateral extraarticular tenodesis. So a few years ago, I know I'm getting scientific, right? But they used to call it, an ALL, which is an anterior lateral ligament. So there was some controversy like 10 years ago that some people claimed they found a new ligament in the knee. It wasn't a new ligament, or was it just always there, kind of part of the LCL? I don't know, but it basically wraps around the front of the tibia. So basically from the lateral side of the knee, it wraps around the front of the tibia, and it's thought to control tibial internal rotation. Well, on a lot of people, they tear their ACL with tibial internal rotation and valgus moment where the knee collapses in. If we can control some of that tibial internal rotation, then we can prevent future ACLs. They've changed the procedure where it used to be an ALL. Now they call it an LET, where they take part of the IT band, they actually just kind of cut it out and flip it around and reconstruct that. Most surgeons are not doing that with a primary ACL. They'll do it on the second one. So if somebody tears their ACL again, then they'll do it to help with that extra control. We chose with my son at age 13 to go ahead and do that LET as well. Part of that was his joints are he's got some joint laxity as it is naturally. And then he's young. We didn't have as much confidence in the way that graft was going to hold up. So I just said, I only want to do this one time, so let's do it all. And that's what we did with him. So again, there's kind of some nuances there with the surgical procedures, but you asked the question of like, what does that look like for a 13-year-old? It's dicey.
Yeah.
And I don't like hearing any kid that young tearing their ACL.
And I think I mentioned to you at my previous, company that I worked for. The company's name is Playermaker, which was a tracking device, okay. Also with the intention of, it was like two, tracking sensors that you put on each foot. So the idea there was to track data, not just centrally like a catapult, but to have the per foot data on for every step, to be able to spot red flags and injuries. So I was always around, youth soccer, and it was a soccer product to begin with. And now I think they expanded to some extras. But I was always around youth soccer, high school soccer, college soccer, all those different things. And I would see so many ACLs, and all like 15-year-old boys, 16-year-old girls. And again, not like the minority of players, but every team would have one or two players wherever you are. Also, us at Penn State, every season, there was a minimum one or two players, minimum, who tore their ACL. Right. So it's like, it was all over the place. So it's just, but you're talking about all these nuances, and I think it's like the nuances is pretty much everything, because if, someone like your son tears their ACL, goes home to their dad, who is not someone, just the dad is an accountant and doesn't, know someone like you, they would just opt in for whatever, whoever the primary doctor sends them to. They would opt in and just do it without thinking of the nuances and without, just kind of jumping into it without knowing the rates of failure, without knowing what's involved with, developing, a discrepancy in your leg height and all these different things. So it is crucial. Have you...
Can I add something to that?
Please,
just to reinforce the point. Interesting stat. There's well over 300,000 ACLs done in the U.S. every year, and 90% of them are done by surgeons that do less than 10 a year. And I think that's a scary stat. And because I want the guy to do my ACL that does 10 a week, right? And we are seeing there's been a change, especially in orthopedic surgery, with a lot more subspecialties. someday I'll have a knee replaced. I want the guy that does 5 a day, right?
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more kind of specialists that do that. But to your point, like, a lot of kids are still just being sent out to sort of, especially if they live in a more rural area, to sort of a general orthopedist who may or may not know what they're doing. I can't tell you how many kids come in as Division I athletes and they've had a history of an ACL, and we image it and we throw you look at those x-rays or the MRI and you're like, that doesn't look so good. What do we want to redo this kid's ACL? I don't know, but their risk factor now is really high because it hasn't been done very well. And then you throw on top of that, especially high school kids, when they're at the university level with me, I treat them 5-6 days a week. If I want them 3 hours a day, I get them 3 hours a day. That's how I can be really specific and return them to play at a high level at 6 months. But you have a high school kid who they're only going to get therapy 2, maybe 3 days a week at best. And that's assuming their insurance pays for it, right? But if they have insurance that isn't very good and they run out, maybe they only have 10 or 15 visits a year, like that kid's going to get thrown back out on the soccer field probably way too early when they're not ready to go. Or maybe they have good coverage, but they're going to their local physical therapy clinic that is jack of all trades. They're doing stroke therapy next to the motor vehicle accident next to grandma who just had her knee replaced. Yeah. And they do an ACL or 2 a year. Like, are they really appropriate for that as well? And so
that's it. They might be done with sports forever.
Correct, right? Yeah. Those kids aren't going to have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And I don't know how to solve that. That's more of a systemic problem of our healthcare in general. But yeah, I mean, it is an uphill battle for a lot of people.
As you know, I don't know if I plan to talk so much about ACLs, but I told you that it is an interesting one for me. And I remember my best friend when I tore my ACL was Derrick Rose at Chicago Bulls, because I think it was a year after he tore his ACL, something like that. So I very much I would follow anything he said, and he was very out there. It was like early days of social media, posting videos of rehab and things like that. So I tried to do everything Derrick Rose besides besides throwing into the hoop. So one thing I was going to ask you about was non-surgical ACL rehab, which is rare, but you see this even in there's a couple UFC fighters that don't have ACLs, that they popped their ACLs and never had it reconstructed. There's I think there's 1 or 2 NBA players. There's in the Olympics, you always hear a few stories of these people that maybe tore their ACL 6 months before the Olympics, and not to risk not being ready on time, they just did not go down the surgery route. Have you seen that before?
Yeah. And I've actually done it a couple of times, to be honest with you, rehabbed them. And one of my favorite athletes I've ever worked with, she tore her ACL her senior year of soccer in September, and she had no eligibility left. And she was like, my senior year's gone. And I talked to our orthopedic surgeon and to let me take a stab at it. And we did a month of rehab, 3 hours a day, 5-6 days a week. And she returned for her last 5 games, had an assist, scored a goal. And on her last game on our GPS tracking system, she had the highest speed on the field that she was able to play. Now, she did end up having her ACL redone after the season. I think so. Again, it gets into nuances, right? Part of that is like sport, right? So things like wrestling, UFC, you can get away with those guys not having ACLs. They're not doing a lot of high speed planning, cutting. Now, granted, they get their body into obviously very awkward positions, but I know I've seen a lot of high level wrestlers and MMA guys that do very well without ACLs. Other sports, basketball, soccer, football, it's a little bit harder to do. I think it can be done, but I think long term, they're always going to be better off with having an ACL and having it redone. What we know, according to research, is when you tear your ACL, and sorry, Dani, this is what it is, you have 100% likelihood of having arthritis at some point. Like, it's going to catch up with you. The research is unequivocal about that. But it's a matter of, does that arthritis come in at age 30 or does it come in at age 60, right? And I'd rather it come in at age 60. And so I think that's the main argument for fixing an ACL at an early age. But there are people that are just not real ACL dependent. I mean, there's people that I could show you a video of one of our soccer players. He's a European kid a couple of years ago. I don't remember where he's from, but he tore his ACL. And 2 days later, I had him on the soccer field doing 4-corner agility drills at a high level, high speed, and he did them very well. We ultimately ended up fixing it. I was making an argument at the time that we should try to let him play and see how he does. But I think it was the right decision to fix it. But some people just don't need it to create that rotor stability. Others absolutely have to have it. So I think it comes down to the athlete. It comes down to the sport. I think there are situations where in short-term basis, on a short-term basis for the Olympics or for a championship run or something like that, we can say, you know what, I think we can get away with modifying a couple things. We can rehab the heck out of this. And as long as they're willing to play ball and they're the right mentality and say, I'm going after this, I think you can do that. But ultimately, I think for the vast majority of people long-term for the health of their knee, they're better off having it fixed.
I assume there's like a very small minority of individuals that might get away with it positively. But is it? And I've seen people who tore their ACL, who during a game or during a session, who didn't even know they tore their ACL until after the game or until a couple of days later, which is also pretty fascinating. But what are if one does decide, hey, I'm not doing surgery. I want to rehab my knee and get back to competition to the best of my capabilities. What are we focusing on at that point? Like, what are we trying to accomplish there?
Kind of going back to the injury prevention side, right? Like, it's a complicated question, but to kind of go through kind of sort of a checklist of where I would start. Number one is like, let's look at them biomechanically. How are they built, right? So are their foot mechanics pretty good, or do I need to consider, can I manage poor foot mechanics if they have poor foot mechanics with exercises? Do I need to consider like an arch taping technique or even some sort of a custom orthotic to give them their best chance? Because everything starts at the foot. If their foot collapses, they're going to tend to fall into that internal rotation valgus collapse all the way up the chain. So do I need to do something to block that up front? And I'm not a huge orthotics guy. I use them from time to time. I can use them. But in this situation, you may say, you know what, I need to support that foot so they have as much chance as I can to stay in that neutral position. So like, what do their foot mechanics look like? What do their hip mechanics look like? Are there a female with a really wide pelvis but narrow knees that lead them into that Q angle where they're more likely to tear their ACL? So if that's the case, then do I need to, we can use some specific taping techniques, or what do we need to do at the pelvis? I already talked about leg length a little bit. Is there something there that I'm just looking at the way God built them? Is there something that I can do to maximize what they have, right? And so that oftentimes will be some sort of something external, an orthotic or some taping or something, or a heel lift to maximize what they have. Then from there, it comes down to, the next step is let's get strong again, because the brain knows that there's been trauma there. So it wants to shut everything down to protect it. So how do we get strong and stable again? And so core stability, trunk stability, getting squatting, lunging underneath a load to get as strong as I can. Once we're within about 10% strength-wise, then my next part of that conversation goes into deceleration, because it doesn't matter how much I accelerate. If I can't put the brakes on, you got a really fancy sports car that doesn't have brakes, it's not going to work very well, right? So deceleration, how do I handle that load? I think one of the nuances that a lot of people miss is landing technique. We need heel strike, right? We need to land midfoot. The literature shows us that there's a direct connection between our glutes and our ability to land on our heels and heel strike. So our glutes tend to work better when we have more of a midfoot or a heel strike. And the glutes are what's controlling a lot of the knees. So the knee's the dumbest joint in the body. It just follows what the foot and the hip tell it to do. And so I spend a lot of time with deceleration landing drills of more heel strike, more landing midfoot versus on the toes. And also hamstrings become extremely important. So the ACL in the knee controls the tibia from sliding forward, right? Well, the hamstrings also do the same thing because they start up on the pelvis and come all the way down and attach to the tibia. So when the hamstrings fire at a really high level, they prevent that tibia from sliding forward. So if we're going to have a knee that doesn't have an ACL to prevent that, then my hamstrings have to make up for it. So we're going to do a ton of hamstring work and a ton of eccentric hamstring work as it's getting longer. How does it control that tibia and control that load? So a lot of landing from jumping, a lot of deceleration work of using our muscles to decelerate versus our joints. So I don't want to hear slap, slap, slap when they slow down. Everything's super quiet, absorbing force. And once we can decelerate really well, then we go, okay, well, now how do we start to accelerate? So now we get into running drills, running mechanics, and take them out and start doing some linear running, linear change of speed. And then the last component is getting to change of direction. And I know I'm covering a lot of ground here quickly, but the change of direction that we focus on then is change of direction with our weight inside. Too many people are trying to plant and cut from the outside, where if we keep our weight more on our inside leg, then we don't have to worry about that outside leg being exposed. We're just in a much better biomechanical position with our weight inside, where we can stay over top of that knee versus getting our center of mass away from where we're trying to plant and cut. So that's like the quick, fast 3-minute version of how I work through a rehab progression. For someone who's torn their ACL, if they're post-surgical, I'm going to work through what I just said in 6 to 9 months. For someone who may be trying to come back, we're going to try to work through that progression in 3 or 4 weeks. Can we do that? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Depends on a lot of factors there, as we talked about.
It was very, very interesting. And another one, you touched on it now, was maybe like something about the certain type of the female body. You see these things that come out about, as a female just being more vulnerable to ACL injuries or knee injuries in general. Is that based on your experience working with, female student athletes? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, it is. And the literature is pretty clear on that as well. And there's a few factors there. One of it is women tend to have wider pelvis and narrower knees, which leads you a greater Q angle is what they call it. And so their femur comes down here and the tibia comes there. The greater your Q angle, the more exposed you are to having an ACL, because that knee is going to be more likely to collapse in, rotation, all those factors. So that's part of it. There's also a lot of research out there driving or looking at menstrual cycles, because we also know that the menstrual cycle, at certain times in our menstrual cycle, as the female body is preparing to carry a baby, they'll have increased or decreased levels of joint laxity and joint play. And that's part of just the natural child bearing process. Well, at certain times of the menstrual cycle, our female athletes will be at a little bit heightened risk to an ACL tear. Now, practically, what does that mean? And that's what I've always struggled with, right? Is I can look at that data and be like, well, that's fascinating. But the reality is I can't go to my head coach and say, Susie is at day whatever in her menstrual cycle, so she can't play in the basketball game tonight. My coaches look at me like I have 3 heads, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. But it is a factor we at least have to consider and understand that it exists. But it doesn't change a ton about what I'm doing with my training. But we know that's also a factor that leads the females to tear their ACLs at a higher rate.
Yeah. Very interesting. What do you think led you down just, the role that you find yourself in now, a few decades into your career? Was it, you touched on that you as a football player in college, underwent a few different surgeries and rehabs, and I'm assuming you've seen from the perspective of a athlete going through rehab, you must have seen, if you've been through it a few times, you must have seen a lot, the ups and downs of it.
Right. Well, that's what led me to athletic training. Was I played college football, University of South Dakota, had 5 knee surgeries, did a lot of rehab. I knew I wanted to stay around sports. I loved being in sports still to this day. I love being on the sidelines when I'm there. I love this mentality of going out and winning championships. But I've also learned what I also love is just being a part of a team and being a part of a group of people that you're united in the same goal. And so I thought long and hard in college about coaching because I just saw the ability to invest in young people, and I thought that was cool, and stay around sports. The challenge with coaching is we see so many coaches bounce around a lot, right, like, so even looking back, I'm sure your coaching staff at Penn State, they were probably going from school to school as they're trying to climb the ladder. I'm like, I don't want that for my family. So athletic training became interesting to me because I could have a more stable position at a school or university, but still stay around sports, still invest in young people. And it was intriguing to me to see this rehab. But I really came out of college with much more of a strength conditioning background than I did an athletic training or rehab background, just because I did play college football, and I was fascinated with how we could get stronger. I mean, in college, I was the guy who was playing football, but reading Powerlifting USA, just because I thought it was fascinating to see these guys, and watching World's Strongest Man, of like guys picking up the Atlas stones, right? Like super cool stuff. So then when I got out of college and I was an athletic trainer and a strength coach, it actually got me my first my first job of being able to kind of do a little of both, a little bit of rehab, a little bit of performance. And that's always served me well. But I've always described myself as a strength coach who happens to be an athletic trainer. And while today, with things like manual therapies, dry needling, and I've become a lot more familiar and comfortable in those worlds, in the first 10 years of my practice, I was basically just exercising everybody out of their injury because that's what I knew and what I was comfortable with. I still am a movement-based guy. I still believe the faster I get people moving after an injury, the better off they are. The day after surgery, the day after that ACL, my athletes are moving. We're doing something. I'm putting ropes in their hands to get cardiovascular fitness. I'm putting on an upper body bike. We're doing something because movement is the key to all the things that ail us in this world. And I want to get people moving. But back to your original question, to me, it was that evolution of I was an athlete, loved the human body and how it worked, wanted to stay around sports, and just saw this as a great way I could continue to do that.
My last question to you will be one that I ask every guest on the podcast.
Okay.
And that's, what is something in your life, professionally or non-professionally, that you fundamentally have changed your mind on, over the years, where maybe and I think you did bring up a couple of nice examples of it, maybe in the past when you were more arrogant, or, you gave a couple, different things like that. So, but something like that. And again, it is to encourage that, because, a lot of listeners would be, maybe in the first few years of practicing as clinicians or practitioners out there. And we want to encourage people to just know that they will change their mind on certain things that they might be dogmatic on today.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, by the way. I love that question. And if I had 30 minutes to ponder on it, I probably would give you a different answer. But off the top of my head, and I did bring it up, like I said, I used to think that I could rehab any surgeon's ACL or any surgeon's surgery, and now I realize it's a really big collaboration. I will say one thing I think is healthy for us as clinicians, regardless of what the initials are after our last name, is for us to remember that we're always going to see things through a certain lens. And so me as the rehab guy or the strength guy, I always believed I could exercise or move my way out of anything, right? Any injury. I think surgeons tend to think that they can cut their way through anything, right? Chiropractors tend to believe they can adjust their way through any injury or any ache or pain. And the reality is, it takes all of us working together to have the best possible outcome. So I have to be careful that while I do believe I can rehab a lot of things, I can't rehab everything. There's certain times I just have to go, you know what? I'm not good enough to do this, or I'm not the appropriate person. That's probably a better way to put it. Even though everything looks like a nail to me and the hammer is rehab, I need to understand that there's other hammers that are out there that can pound that nail in with me. And so I think that is something that I think with with time and maturity and evolution, you start to understand, if you practice long enough, you do these things, is there's a place for everybody. There's a place for sports psychology in what we do. There's a place for nutrition and surgeons and chiropractic care, and even stuff that a lot of people would, traditional Chinese medicine. Like, I'm an all the above guy. I think that there's all kinds of different ways we can get to the same endpoint. And the more I get exposed to all those things, the more I can grab and pull things in. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but I think just that for me over time is we have to have this larger, big picture of team approach to our healthcare.
Which is, again, good advice. I would, I just want to ask you on that, where, let's say today that you're more aware that you can't maybe fix everyone or rehab everyone, who's coming out of a surgery, just because of different factors that I'm assuming you faced along the way. So what does that cause you to just be more aware and communicative, even with the surgery outcomes, to be able to spot maybe things from your perspective that don't look right or could affect the rehab protocol based on the results of the surgery that maybe 15, 20 years ago you wouldn't be as proficient in?
Communication is the key, and communication with all active parties, the patients, the coaches, the surgeons, the athletic trainers, the strength coaches, the chiropractors, like everybody. The more we can all work together and communicate, and sometimes that means we swallow our pride and communicate that, hey, maybe I screwed up at some point, or maybe I'm not the right person. That's okay, because at the end of the day, the focus has to be on the patient. And but that communication piece is, to me, the number one thing that a lot of people are missing is, and I don't want to say they're missing, but they're just underappreciating that communication piece of having all parties be constantly involved is how we get to the best end goal for everybody.
Very good, Mitch. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate your time. So I'm glad we did this. Thank you.
Thank
you.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you very, very much. And I hope we can do this again sometime and explore, more topics and more injuries, more surgeries.
Ankle to the shoulder instead of the ACL. I don't know. But yeah, I'd love to.
Ankles is another one that I was on my list to talk about with you, so we can get to that in the future. I will also send my, best to your son. I hope he comes out of this stronger physically and mentally, and mentally for sure. I'm sure it'll only help long term. But he has good guidance. He has good guidance at home. That's good.
I've always been a huge believer that youth sports weren't created so we could create a bunch of college and pro athletes. Youth sports are here to make us better human beings down the road and understand how to be leaders, but accept leadership, how to learn, how to work within a team, how to handle adversity, right? And so this just becomes another teaching point for him, hopefully, that someday when he is 25, 30, 35 years old and is in a difficult situation or has a new baby at home or whatever, he looks back and goes, hey, you know what? I did that when I was 13. I'll figure this out as well, and we'll be all good. So I think as long as we look at youth sports through that lens, it's a really healthy way to do it, and our kids will be better off.
Absolutely. So Mitch, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you as well.
Bye-bye.